Hashtag Port Charles on a knife's edge, trust, power, and a promise of music. Port Charles has weathered more than its share of storms, but the latest squall arrives in the most deceptively quiet way, a warning whispered across a private threshold, a signature inked behind heavy doors, a bow lifted hesitantly above the strings. At the center of it all stands Alexis Davis, Nancy Lee Grahn, the veteran truth-teller whose instincts have saved lives and broken illusions. Her concern this time is not abstract ethics or legal fine print, it is Sonny Corinthos, Maurice Benard, himself, his impulses, his blind spots, and the particular peril of anyone capable of exploiting both. With Veronica Ronnie Bard, Erica Slezak, slipping into the Quartermaine orbit just as Monica Quartermaine, Leslie Charleson, prepares to read a pivotal will, Alexis sees the pattern long before most. When a new figure arrives with old money keys and ready-made answers, the smart response is not applause, it's scrutiny. Hashtag Alexis quiet alarm. Alexis has never been sentimental about warning Sonny. She understands the person he is when he is loved, and the person he becomes when he is underestimated. Her counsel is not meant to corral him but to calibrate him. Ronnie is, at first glance, a study in composed competence, gracious, dry-eyed, and apparently immune to the melodrama that so often claims the Quartermaine parlor. Yet Alexis does the math quickly. The timing is too convenient. The proximity to the will is too neat. The assurances are packaged too perfectly for a family renowned for messy edges and combustible loyalties. Sonny, whose instincts are honed on threat and terrain, is ironically least prepared for the kind of adversary who enters not by force but by invitation. Alexis' warning therefore arrives as a balancing weight, a reminder that charm and legitimacy can, in practiced hands, serve as cover more effective than muscle. Hashtag Ronnie's ascension and the architecture of control. If Ronnie indeed steps into a position of authority at the Quartermaine mansion after Monica reads the will, it will not be by accident. Power within that estate has always been a mosaic, old legal instruments, codicils scrawled in anxious midnights, trustees whose loyalties drift with the family tide. The Quartermaines endure not because they agree, but because their disagreements are built into the house itself, layered, litigated, and, ironically, stabilizing. Ronnie's anticipated consolidation appends that equilibrium. She appears as a solution, a steward, a fixer, perhaps a final executor who promises to honor Monica's wishes and Edward's ghostly standards. But Alexis suspects that the new order is engineered to look inevitable. To assume control at the exact moment when grief hushes dissent requires more than timing, it requires infrastructure, lawyers who nod on cue, documents that read as if dictated from beyond the grave, and a narrative flattering enough to lull even the vigilant. Hashtag the shadow in the ledger, Martin Gray's risky margin. Enter the possibility of Martin Gray, Michael E. Knight, a man of elegant signatures and elastic ethics. He has built a career out of finding leverage in footnotes and fortune in ambiguity. If fraud is in the air, Martin is the kind of operator who prefers to stand 3 steps away from the smoke while profiting from the heat. The danger for him now is that the Quartermaine estate is not a generic trust or a shell corporation, it is a living museum of grudges. Anyone who tampers with it leaves fingerprints on glass polished daily by a legion of rivals. If Martin has facilitated the paperwork, orchestrated a transfer, or nudged a clause into alignment with Ronnie's interests, the trap is already tightening. Quartermaine chaos, after all, is a feedback loop. The moment one branch senses an imbalance, the others mobilize out of instinct if not affection. Sooner or later, becomes less a timeline and more a law of nature in this family. What is hidden is inevitably hauled into the light. Hashtag Sonny between instinct and invitation. Sonny's predicament is exquisitely paradoxical. He is a man built for conflict, and yet the conflict here is disguised as hospitality. He is trained to read a room, but this room reads him, drawing him into conversations about legacy, respect, and order that mirror his own vocabulary for family. Ronnie's potential stewardship of the mansion could be pitched as a stabilizing force, something Sonny is conditioned to value when it protects those he loves. Alexis' counsel asks him to resist precisely the kind of flattery that validates his better angels, the appeal to unity, to pragmatic calm, to the notion that a peaceful house is a safe one. But true safety in Port Charles rarely looks like serenity. It looks like skepticism, contingency, proof. ## a house that records every footstep. The Quartermaine living room has been both courtroom and confessional. When Monica reads the will, every syllable will be weighed not only for content but for cadence. The family's history has taught them that nothing is binding until the last raised brow settles. If Ronnie steps forward afterward with keys, literal or figurative, expect a flurry of phone calls and a silent stampede to archives. The Quartermaines keep records the way generals keep maps, and inconsistencies are blood in the water. If the documents are pure, they will survive inspection; if not, the first small fracture will widen quickly. Against this backdrop, any involvement by Martin becomes combustible. He thrives in ambiguities, the Quartermaines weaponize them. ## the musician at the crossroads. Meanwhile, in a corner of town seemingly far from boardrooms and wills, Giovanni Gio Palmieri, Giovanni Mazza, contemplates a promise. It is deceptively modest, to play the violin at Donna Corinthos, Scarlet Spears' birthday party. Yet in a landscape this fraught, the choice carries disproportionate meaning. Joe's bow is not just an instrument, it is a compass. To return to the stage is to reclaim discipline, community, and a sense of self that is not mediated by fear or headlines. To step away is to concede that Port Charles's darkness has crowded out its ceremony, that celebration itself is a luxury. Gio knows what performance requires: quiet, focus, breath, and he also knows what this town demands: noise, reaction, speed. His dilemma becomes an elegant counterpoint to the Quartermaine upheaval. One man deciding whether an honest craft can still matter in a place where power performs constantly. ## why Alexis warning matters. The genius of Alexis' intervention is that it refuses to be dramatic. Port Charles is flooded with grand gestures. Alexis places a single stone in Sonny's path and asks him to notice it. She knows how the story goes when a well-spoken outsider moves into a legacy home and immediately speaks with the authority of an archivist. The question is not simply whether Ronnie is corrupt, it is whether she is accountable. Who checks the checker when the checker controls the house? Alexis is calibrated to the answer: only those who prepare before the applause, who collect facts while the champagne is uncorked, who read the will and also the margins. ## Martin's margin of error. If Martin is implicated, his downfall will not be cinematic at first. It will start with discrepancies, dates that don't align with travel records, a notary who recognizes a signature that was supposedly witnessed elsewhere, an email drafted at a time the sender claimed to be offline. Martin understands that the most dangerous evidence in Port Charles is the kind that looks boring. He also understands that Alexis is uniquely fluent in boredom; she reads it as code. The risk for Martin is that he is playing in a registry where Alexis, Monica, and the QC Old Guard have spent decades burying and unburying landmines. Every shortcut he may have taken now runs through terrain mapped by people who expect sabotage. ## Sonny, Donna, and the stakes of a birthday. Donna's birthday is more than a date on a family calendar. In a town where landmarks are often tragedies, birthdays are counter-narratives, proof that ordinary time still passes, that cakes can be cut and wishes do not always double as legal strategies. Joe's decision to play would affirm Sonny's instinct to protect the small rituals that anchor his children. It also challenges Sonny to take Alexis' warning seriously without letting suspicion poison a celebration meant for innocence. The paradox is perfect: Port Charles, vigilant enough to catch a scheme, generous enough to keep the music. ## Ronnie's best defense. None of this presumes Ronnie's guilt. In fact, her strongest protection may be transparency. If the documents are clean, if Monica's will truly places the mansion's reins in Ronnie's steady hands, the fastest way to stability is the sunlight Alexis craves. Invite auditors before rivals demand them. Publish the structure before whispers calcify into accusations. The Quartermaines can accept almost anything except being managed in the dark. Should Ronnie choose open governance, clear ledgers, explicit roles, accountable stewardship, Alexis' warning becomes less an indictment and more a prudent ritual, like checking the locks at night. ## The House reacts. When power shifts at the mansion, reaction is not optional, it is tradition. Expect the familiar choreography, ELQ whispers, boardroom feints, alliances temporarily stitched across old fault lines. Those maneuvers, however, are often less about greed than about ecosystem. The family knows that an unvetted custodian can do more damage in weeks than a feud can in years. That is why Alexis' vigilance resonates beyond Sunny. Her posture becomes the model, cautious, informed, and uninterested in theater. ## Joe's answer. Joe's choice, when it comes, will feel small against the Quartermaine thunderclaps, but the town will register it. If he lifts the violin and honors Donna's party, he confirms that Port Charles still makes room for grace under pressure. The act will reflect back on Sunny, too, reminding him that not every problem is solved by escalation, some are steadied by constancy. If Gio declines, it will say something else, something painful, that fear has tightened its grip again, that even a child's birthday cannot outrun the city's undertow. Either way, the decision will echo past the last note or the last silence. ## The road ahead. So where does this leave the players? Alexis has done the most important work already, she has named the risk. Sunny must decide how to honor that without letting suspicion sour every gesture in Ronnie's direction. Ronnie must understand that her best path is daylight, not dominance. Martin, if he has indeed cut corners, must reckon with the math of Port Charles. The bill always comes due, especially when it is itemized in Quartermaine ink. And Gio must discover whether his art is a refuge or a responsibility. Port Charles thrives on brinkmanship, but it survives on ritual. A will is read, a warning is issued, a bow is raised. In the space between those moments, character is revealed. If power has shifted at the mansion, it will either harden into a fortress or open into a forum. If a lawyer has gambled, truth will chase him down the corridor. If a musician keeps his promise, a child will dance and a father will breathe a little easier. The city does not solve itself in a single hour. It endures through 1,000 small choices that shape the larger storms. Alexis knows this. Sunny, deep down, does too. And even the walls of the Quartermaine living room have learned to listen for the difference between a performance and the truth. In the end, the test is simple. Does Port Charles feel more honest after these moves, or merely more orderly? Order without honesty is a mask the town refuses to wear for long. That is why Alexis' quiet alarm matters, why Ronnie's next step is decisive, why Martin's margin may close faster than he anticipates, and why Joe's music, fragile, human, unarmed, remains the bravest sound a place like this can still make.